Hey guys, tonight we're going to gently unbox a story that's been quietly rattling around the back of your brain for years. Picture this: the sun has long gone down, and somewhere in a modest glass case in a sleepy corner of Connecticut, a worn-out rag doll sits perfectly still, or at least she's supposed to. You've probably seen her name whispered in late-night YouTube thumbnails, or felt the shiver when someone mentions that iconic haunted doll. But tonight, we're not here to get spooked. Nope. We're here to get bored, calmly, soothingly, and slowly. Annabelle, she's stitched with old fabric, not jump scares. Her movements are more rumor than reality. Her presence, far more psychological than physical. And yet, her story never really ends. The moment you think the world's moved on, someone brings her back through a TikTok, a Conjuring spin-off, or some sleepy podcast like this one. You probably won't survive this, not because she's haunted, but because the monotony of haunted doll history might just lull you into the best nap of your week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you are. It's always cool seeing who's falling asleep around the world with the same oddly comforting tale. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in 1970. The Vietnam War rumbles on overseas. Nixon is president. Gas is 36 cents a gallon. And in a quiet American suburb, a mother strolls into a secondhand store. Her daughter, Donna, is about to graduate nursing school, and she wants to find a gift, something sweet, simple, maybe sentimental. Her eyes land on a floppy-limbed Raggedy Ann doll, red yarn hair, painted on smile, and faded blue dress. It looks friendly, cheap, familiar. And in hindsight, weirdly, still. You don't hear any bells or shrieks. There's no demonic aura. No shopkeeper saying, "Are you sure about that one?" Just a quiet sale. The kind that slips through history without a ripple until someone looks back. Donna unwraps the doll in her apartment days later. She shares the place with another nurse, Angie. They're in their early 20s, juggling rotations, cafeteria food, and grumpy instructors. The doll, Annabelle, they start calling her, is more decoration than toy. She sits on a rocking chair in the living room. She doesn't blink. She doesn't talk. She just sits. At first, nothing happens. You go about your shift, your classes, your meals. You come home and find her in the same chair. A little creepy, sure, but more in the way of, why do dolls have to smile like that? Than, I think she's alive. Still, a few weeks pass and you start noticing oddities. Minor ones, the kind you brush off. Annabelle is no longer in her chair. She's on the floor, or against the wall, or halfway inside your bedroom. You ask your roommate, "Did you move her?" "She didn't." You shrug. Maybe she fell. Maybe someone bumped her. It's not worth arguing over a stuffed doll. But the pattern continues. One day, you leave her on the couch. You return hours later to find her standing, yes, standing against the wall, arms by her side. Now, she can't stand. She has no internal frame, no plastic core, just stuffing and old cloth. So how? You begin to feel uneasy, but you don't call the police about your doll. You talk to your friend, Lou. He's not a believer in ghosts. He thinks it's all nonsense, but he jokes that the doll is giving him weird vibes. And one night, he has a dream. In it, Annabelle climbs onto his chest, puts her hands around his throat, and begins to choke him. Classic sleep paralysis, right? Historians still argue whether this moment was a dream or a deeper kind of experience. The next day, Lou swears he hears noises in Donna's room. When he enters, no one's there except Annabelle, sitting quietly. Then, scratch. He feels pain, sharp pain. His chest is bleeding. 3 claw-like marks. Nothing lethal, nothing lasting, but real, tangible. Like the doll wanted to say, don't ignore me. You're not laughing anymore. Donna and Angie start writing down the incidents. A note appears on parchment they don't own, written in childlike scrawl. Help us. Sometimes. Help Lou. They contact a medium, a woman with calm eyes and a softly urgent voice. She performs a séance in their apartment, the air thick with candle smoke and uncertainty. Through her, they claim to hear from a spirit, a little girl named Annabelle Higgins who died on this property long ago. She says she just wants to stay with them. She's lonely. She likes them. You pity her. So you let the spirit stay. You invite her to possess the doll. Cue the forehead slap. Even the most skeptical listener knows that's not how you ghost responsibly. Here's the quirky part. Raggedy Ann was originally a wholesome icon. Created in 1915 by cartoonist Johnny Gruelle after his daughter's death, the doll was a symbol of innocence, even appearing in stories teaching kids morality and kindness. That contrast, the syrupy original versus the cursed retelling, makes the tale even eerier. Still, despite the growing discomfort, the roommates didn't get rid of the doll. They cared, or feared, or maybe both. Your eyelids are heavy. The story is unfolding like a slow movie on mute. No jump scares, just steady dread. You realize this is how most hauntings start in folklore, quietly. No music sting, just an accumulation of small, unexplainable nudges. The girls finally call in bigger help, psychic investigators. The names Ed and Lorraine Warren pop up for the first time. We'll get to them in more detail soon. For now, just picture 2 middle-aged Catholics with a station wagon full of holy water and opinions. They meet Annabelle and decide this isn't a ghost. This is inhuman, demonic, and worse. It's tricking them. They take the doll, place her in the back seat. The car stalls, swerves, brakes fail. At every red light, Ed sprinkles holy water on the back seat, nervously checking his mirror. You imagine the doll sitting there, head tilted, floppy arms by her side, utterly unbothered. Eventually, they reach home. The story should end there, but of course it doesn't, because you're here, listening to a tale that's still being retold half a century later, in apartments and bedrooms and podcasts like this one, not because the doll does anything anymore, but because we keep moving it forward. You're still in the same dim room, the fan still humming, and your brain just gently tiptoed past that first strange chapter. But the story doesn't let you go. Because Annabelle doesn't just vanish into a drawer somewhere. No, now she becomes a house guest. You follow the Warrens as they carry her, ever so gingerly, into their quiet New England home. They don't put her in a toy box or a basement. No, she gets her own chair, a special chair, in their office. Because apparently that's what you do with possibly demon-possessed objects. You give them good lighting and respect. She just sits there, raggedy, quiet, innocent. But weird things start again. Dogs bark when they pass her. Cold spots gather. Visitors report dizziness. You don't hear screams or see levitations. This isn't a horror movie, but you sense that the atmosphere changes. Like walking into a room where someone's just had an argument. The air is thick, and the doll just watches. The Warrens start taking notes. Lorraine, the clairvoyant, says the spirit inside isn't a child. It's something darker pretending to be innocent to gain sympathy. That classic wolf in a stuffed lamb scenario. Ed, ever the practical demonologist, builds a plan. Annabelle needs to be contained. Here's where things get a little extra. He builds a wooden case for her, not just a display shelf, but a full-on consecrated glass box, complete with velvet lining and a little sign that reads, "Warning, positively do not open." You wonder, who made the warning label? Was it handcrafted by a priest or printed at Kinko's? Historians still argue whether this presentation was spiritual necessity or marketing genius. Still, the box works. Kind of. Annabelle stays put, more or less. You imagine visiting the Warren household in the 70s. It's cozy, modest, full of books on hauntings, and cluttered with religious artifacts and strange memorabilia. And in one corner, her. People come from all over just to see her. Some out of belief, some out of boredom. Everyone leaves with a story, or at least a raised eyebrow. And then there's Lou. You remember Lou from the last section, the guy who got scratched. He's become the folktale within the folktale. Some visitors claim to see his picture in the Warren archives. Others say they've felt something touch their necks in the room, like a faint reminder. Still, the Warrens continue their work. Ghosts, demons, cursed houses. But Annabelle always gets mentioned, not because she's the scariest, but because she's the most visible and maybe the most manageable. Now we arrive at the part where things start to spin outward. You step into the 1980s and 90s. Paranormal investigation becomes a bit of a cultural side hustle. TV specials, radio call-ins, real haunting segments between commercials for toothpaste. And in the middle of it all, guess who still sits in that box? Yep, your girl Annabelle. Her fame doesn't roar. It simmers, slowly, like an old pot on a back burner. You might forget about her for a while, until someone brings her up again and everyone at the sleepover goes silent. Let's pause for a moment on her actual construction, shall we? Annabelle isn't a delicate porcelain doll like in the movies. She's a standard floppy-limbed Raggedy Ann, manufactured en masse, a product of the 20th century's wholesome childhood aesthetic. Created originally in 1915, the doll was supposed to represent comfort and safety, a simple symbol of Americana. She's made of cotton and stuffing and goodwill. And yet, here she is, legend adjacent, That contrast is important. It's part of why this story never ends. Because your brain doesn't compute that this doll could be that scary. She's not gothic. She's not Victorian. She's not elegant. She's cute, frumpy, a little faded. Which makes every story about her doing something unnatural feel twice as wrong. Now, here's your quirky tidbit for the section. One visitor to the Warren Museum claimed the doll blinked at him when his back was turned. He then tripped down the front steps. Coincidence? Probably, but he insists. And the idea that the doll watches has become a recurring theme. You look closer and start to notice how the mythology stacks on itself. Small events become anecdotes. Anecdotes become articles. Articles become legend. That's how folklore happens. You think it's a ghost story, but really, it's a whisper game stretched across decades. You settle deeper into your pillow. The fan whirs on. A quiet part of you wonders, if a story keeps growing even when nothing new happens, does that make it more real or more ridiculous? Either way, Annabelle's presence in the Warren home becomes a permanent fixture, like an old relative you don't visit, but always acknowledge in the family lore. Visitors come, they're warned not to touch the glass. Most obey. Most, you'll meet one who didn't next time. But for now, you close your eyes and see her there. Stitched smile, glass between you, and a warning that may or may not be serious. Because she's not just a doll, she's an idea. You're still there, drifting, half lulled by the hum of your fan and the gentle tug of an overstuffed pillow. But the room in your imagination is darker now. The museum's lights are off, and only moonlight from a stained glass window flickers on the face of the doll behind the glass. Her stitched mouth doesn't move, but you sense a smirk. You blink. Nothing changes. But the story does. You remember the warning sign, positively do not open. You'd laugh if it didn't feel oddly specific. Why not please be careful? Why not fragile? No. This one's more urgent, more like a threat than a request. And then you hear about the guy on the motorcycle. It's a story the Warrens told often. A young man visiting the museum with his girlfriend is full of swagger and bad decisions. He taps the glass, laughs at the legend, even mocks the doll, telling Annabelle to do her worst. The Warrens ask him to leave. He does. Minutes later, while still laughing, his motorcycle crashes into a tree. He dies instantly. His girlfriend survives, but with broken bones and a completely shattered perspective on Raggedy Ann. Historians still argue whether this ever happened at all. There's no police record to confirm it, no name ever verified, but the tale gets repeated on forums, in documentaries, even whispered in ghost tours. It's become what we call a cautionary anecdote, a story designed not to prove, but to prevent. Still, it's effective. You probably wouldn't tap the glass either. And here's the thing. This glass box becomes part of the mythology, like the jar that held Pandora's mischief, or the sarcophagus of a forgotten pharaoh. The containment is the mystery. Is it keeping something in, or keeping us from ourselves? Visitors continue to come. Some pray, some take selfies, A few leave shaken. A handful swear they saw the doll shift, even though the cameras never capture it. There's a long-standing rumor that the museum occasionally smells of old roses when no roses are there. Meanwhile, the Warrens continue to age. They give lectures, appear on late-night TV. They become part of pop culture. Like the ghost-busting grandparents no one asked for but everyone sort of tolerates. But even they admit something strange about Annabelle's ongoing activity. They begin a pattern of monthly blessings. A priest comes in, says the prayers, sprinkles the holy water. That's what you do when you have a demonic containment unit in your office. Here's your quirky fact for this stretch of story. The room where Annabelle is stored also includes other cursed items, like a demon-infested mirror and a shadow doll that supposedly visits people in their dreams. You think your junk drawer is weird? Imagine a haunted items closet. The priest, let's call him Father John, initially thinks the whole setup is a little theatrical. He comes out of curiosity, more academic than spiritual. But after his third visit, he starts to walk out backward, doesn't turn his back on the glass, won't explain why. You don't have to believe him. But it's hard not to picture the way your own spine tightens when something feels wrong in the dark. At this point, Annabelle is no longer just a story. She's part of a wider conversation about belief, about fear, about why certain objects hold power. Paranormal experts begin to debate whether haunted items act as conduits or conductors, if the doll is just a vessel, or an active participant in some supernatural performance. Scholars in folklore departments start paying attention too. One paper from a Midwestern university refers to Annabelle as a modern golem, built not from clay but from fabric and fear. Another suggests she's a form of hyperstitional artifact, a myth that becomes real because people believe in it, and that's where the real haunting begins. Because you notice how the story is no longer about what Annabelle does, but what people say she does. You think about the nature of belief, how stories loop through time, how something as small as a doll can ripple across cultures and decades. You think of chain emails from the early 2000s, pass this on, or a ghost will visit you. Now swap the email with the museum visit. Swap the ghost with a doll. The rhythm is the same. The shape of the fear remains constant. Let's detour for a second and zoom in on one debate. Why dolls? Why not haunted toasters or vengeful vacuum cleaners? Why does the human brain assign dread to something that's literally made for children? Psychologists point to the uncanny valley, that sense of wrongness when something is almost human, but not quite. Dolls straddle that line. Their eyes don't blink, but they always seem to stare. Their smiles are fixed, unbothered, unaffected, and Annabelle, in her faded cotton glory, is the queen of this effect. A perfect storm of innocence and ambiguity. You get the sense that even if she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't scratch Lou or crash motorcycles, people would still feel weird around her, because she's a reflection, not of evil, but of belief. That's the secret no one says out loud. Annabelle is just a mirror for fear, a canvas for projection. People bring their anxieties, their childhood superstitions, their guilt, and leave it at her feet. And the story continues, because as long as someone knocks on the Warrens' door, peers through the glass, feels that cold air or catches a scent of roses. Annabelle lives on. She doesn't need to move. You do it for her. You're deeper now. Not asleep yet, but pleasantly sinking, like a warm sock in a dryer or a boat drifting down a glassy river in the fog. Your breathing slows, and so does the rhythm of the story. But it never stops, because Annabelle never stops. By the time we reach the early 2000s, the Warrens are older, their steps a little slower, but their home museum, still open, still drawing crowds, still whispering, and Annabelle, still sitting in her case, isn't fading into obscurity. Quite the opposite. You see, this is when technology meets folklore. The internet is booming, and so is the thirst for spooky content. YouTubers, paranormal blogs, online forums all start buzzing about the doll. Images of her glass case get shared. Stories, half remembered, half invented, get reposted. The tale of the motorcycle guy resurfaces, now with new, less verifiable details. Apparently, in one version, he insulted the doll in Italian. In another, he licked the glass. Why? Historians don't agree. Now Annabelle is no longer just a relic in a house museum in Connecticut. She's digital, eternal, and somehow even more animated in this static form. The irony, right? She hasn't moved a muscle, but she's everywhere now. You scroll through comments beneath a grainy video of the Warren Museum. I swear I saw her blink. Guys, don't watch this at 3 a.m. I tapped the screen and my light flickered. Do these count as paranormal events? Or just the world having fun with itself? Scholars still argue over whether digital folklore holds the same weight as oral tradition, or whether we're just playing a high-speed version of telephone with emojis. But here's the key moment that sends the whole story mainstream. The Conjuring universe. It's 2013. The first Conjuring movie drops. And in its chilling prologue, guess who gets the spotlight? Yep, Annabelle. But movie Annabelle isn't your floppy, red yarn sweetheart. No, she's been upgraded for maximum terror. Now she's wooden-faced, ghostly pale, with cracked porcelain cheeks and wide, staring eyes that look like they've seen your browser history. It's not historically accurate, but it's effective. Moviegoers gasp. People start Googling. Suddenly the real Annabelle gets her own Wikipedia page. The real Raggedy Ann sales even spike for about 6 confusing weeks. You can almost hear the real Annabelle smirking behind the glass. She's not just a doll anymore. She's a brand. Now, it's not just a matter of spooky lore passed around campfires. Now she has lore with cinematic backing. Writers begin debating the ethics of turning real cursed objects into box office hits. Is it exploitative? Is it fiction? Do spirits care about royalties? The Warrens, of course, are fine with it. Or at least Ed was. He passed in 2006. Lorraine continues the legacy, softly spoken, with that same glassy stare that makes you wonder if she knows something you don't. Here's your quirky tidbit. One of the film's producers reportedly refused to be on set with the movie version Annabelle doll after dark. Even prop Annabelle unnerved people. And no one really wanted to be the last person to lock up the doll each night. The blurring of reality and fiction accelerates. Fans travel from across the world to visit the real museum. Some leave shaken, others leave with souvenir magnets, and a few leave with stories of their own. There's one girl, let's call her Maya, who swears that after her visit, her childhood Raggedy Ann doll, long packed away in her attic, somehow showed up on her bed, dusty, crooked, but unmistakable. Her parents denied touching it. Her brother laughed until his room started smelling faintly of mildew and roses. Coincidence? Maybe. But try telling Maya that, and this is what keeps the Annabelle tale alive. Not big, dramatic moments, but small echoes, fragments. That weird sound your house makes at night that could be the pipes or a soft cotton footstep. Remember that time you felt a chill while scrolling Reddit at 2 a.m.? Remember how you told yourself it was nothing? And maybe it was. But now that you've heard this story, do you wonder? Now let's talk about the museum's containment rituals. Lorraine keeps them up. Monthly blessings. Rosaries hung on the case. Candles lit during storms. Some might call it superstition. Others call it maintenance. After all, you oil the hinges. You water the plants. Why not keep the demon doll hydrated with holy water? Visitors are told never to touch the case. Most obey, most. And here comes one of the more infamous episodes. A young man, again, a theme perhaps, asks if he can open the box. He's told no, obviously, but hours later, he's caught trying to slide the case open while his friend records on a flip phone. They're escorted out. Nothing happens until 2 days later, when the friend reports his phone mysteriously bricked. All videos gone. Only one image remains, a blurry photo of the doll, mid-shift. Her head tilted just slightly more than memory allowed. Again, no proof, just enough mystery. Historians still argue whether the doll's influence ever left the museum, or whether the real power lies in believing that it could. And this leads us to the true engine of the Annabelle story, repetition. You don't need new hauntings when the old ones are told well. You just need one more person to believe, and then one more after that. You feel your breath slow. Not out of fear, but out of familiarity. You've heard this kind of story before. Maybe not about Annabelle, maybe about the girl in the mirror, or the number you should never text, or the song that kills you in your sleep. Urban legends, internet creepypasta, ghost stories dressed for the algorithm. But Annabelle, she's older than the apps. She was viral before viral. Because you don't need Wi-Fi to pass along fear. Just a little whisper and a reason to never tap on the glass. You're nestled in now, wrapped in a quiet that hums like old radio static. Your eyes are heavy, your body warm, but your brain still tuned in. Because Annabelle's story isn't fading, it's expanding, like an ink blot soaking through history. After The Conjuring, Hollywood realizes something. Fear is profitable, especially the kind with a based on a true story label, however flexible that truth may be. So in 2014 they release Annabelle, a full-length film dedicated to the doll. Now, let's be clear, this movie is not a documentary. The doll is porcelain, disturbingly beautiful, and she definitely moves. At one point, she sits in a rocking chair and just rocks. No strings, no nudges, just a demon casually enjoying her vintage furniture. And here's your mainstream historical fact. The film makes over $250 million worldwide. That's more than most Oscar contenders. So naturally, sequels follow. Annabelle, Creation in 2017, then Annabelle Comes Home in 2019. Each dives deeper into the doll's invented backstory, giving her a narrative arc, motives, even a wardrobe somewhere along the way. She becomes less of an object and more of a character. Audiences eat it up, but something strange happens. With each movie, people start to think they know her. You hear phrases like, well, the real Annabelle wouldn't do that. In Creation, she's supposed to be linked to Sister Charlotte. Wait, what? Are we defending canon for a haunted doll? Historians still argue whether this kind of pop culture retconning enhances or distorts folklore. Is Annabelle more powerful now that she has a backstory, or has Hollywood hollowed her out, like a plastic Halloween decoration with a voice box? Either way, the fans are in, deep in. Reddit threads debate her powers. YouTubers claim she causes electronic interference. There are TikToks with titles like, Annabelle tried to contact me. Real footage. Spoiler, the footage is rarely convincing, but the vibe is potent. Here's your quirky tidbit. During the filming of Annabelle Comes Home, the production team reportedly brought in a priest to bless the set before filming began. You know, just in case. One actor later admitted he wouldn't look the doll in the eyes between takes, because even the prop creeped him out. Meanwhile, back at the Warren Occult Museum, the original Annabelle's still sitting in her wooden case. Same faded smile. Same warning, positively do not open sign. But now, people are showing up not to ask about Ed and Lorraine, but to see her. They pose next to the case like it's the Eiffel Tower. And then, in 2020, another twist. The museum closes. Yep, zoning issues, neighbor complaints. Some say, others whisper that Annabelle herself didn't like the new management. Now the doll is in a private location, still under the care of the Warren's son-in-law, Tony Spera. He occasionally posts updates, videos of him standing beside the case, reminding viewers the doll hasn't escaped, which, naturally, fuels the belief that she has. In August 2020, a rumor explodes online that Annabelle is missing. A tweet claims she's escaped her case. Within hours, memes flood the internet. People joke that she's on a road trip. Someone photoshops her into a beach chair. Another image shows her checking into a motel in Ohio. The weird part? People believe it. For real. Searches for Annabelle escaped spike. News outlets issue fact checks. Tony Spera posts a video, tapping on the glass, saying, she's still here. But the seed is planted, and this is what makes Annabelle so unique. She thrives on uncertainty, on just enough maybe. She doesn't need to move. She doesn't need to speak. You do all the work for her, filling in the blanks, imagining her grin in the corner of your room. The more she's talked about, the more real she becomes. Kind of like that dream you had once, where your stuffed animal watched you sleep. You woke up convinced it blinked. You were 6 or 26. Doesn't matter. The feeling lingers. Now think about this. The real Annabelle has never actually hurt anyone. At least, not definitively. No blood, no bites, no crawling across the ceiling. But that might be the scariest part. She's just there. And that's the kind of fear that lasts. Not the jump scare, but the slow, creeping possibility. You imagine a friend joking about her, tapping the glass, taking a selfie, then calling you that night, whispering that their lights keep flickering and their cat won't go near the closet. And you'd laugh, but you'd also check your locks, just in case. By this point in the journey, your limbs are melting into the bed. The story's gotten weirder, sure, but also familiar, like hearing a lullaby sung through a fan, slightly off. You followed Annabelle from a toy store shelf to a locked display case, to the silver screen, to the strange place she lives now, in Wi-Fi signals and whispery group chats. She hasn't moved, but she's everywhere. And that, dear listener, is why the story doesn't end. Because you're still listening. And somewhere, maybe Annabelle is too. Your eyes flutter a little, but not quite closed. There's a comfort in the rhythm now, the soft, sleepy tempo of a story that refuses to stop spinning. You shift, barely, and the whisper of your bedsheets sounds like someone sighing behind you. Don't worry, just your imagination. Or maybe. We pick up right where we left off. Annabelle sealed tight in her glass case, YouTube personalities whispering dramatic warnings, and the 2020 internet practically foaming at the mouth over her rumored escape. But here's the next strange twist. The more people try to debunk Annabelle, the more her legend grows. See, once something enters pop culture with that level of infamy, it mutates. It doesn't matter what the Warrens actually said, or whether the doll ever blinked. What matters is that you've heard of her, and so has your aunt, and your co-worker, and your dentist's teenager who swears she saw Annabelle move at a roadside oddities museum that doesn't even exist. This is your mainstream historical fact, folklore. In the age of the internet, spreads faster and wider than ever before. In the past, it took generations for legends like La Llorona or Bloody Mary to entrench themselves. Now, one viral post, and poof, you're haunted. Annabelle's story, once confined to dusty paranormal books and dimly lit lectures, is now a shape-shifting myth. She exists in tweets, in TikTok trends, in creepypasta retellings with titles like, "I worked security at the Warren Museum. Here's what I saw." Spoiler, what he saw was nothing until 3:14 a.m., when the cameras glitched and the doll was facing a different direction. Of course, historians still argue whether digital folklore like this should be archived and studied like ancient oral traditions. Some see it as disposable internet garbage. Others recognize the exact same storytelling patterns as old village myths, just with more emojis. Now here's a fringe tidbit you didn't expect. At least 2 completely unrelated haunted dolls have been mistaken for Annabelle and gone viral. One in Malaysia, where locals claimed a possessed doll was locked in a box after whispering in a girl's ear. Another in Japan, known as Okiku, whose hair allegedly grows despite being sealed in a shrine. But people still slap the name Annabelle on these dolls when they go viral, because once she's in your brain, she becomes the shorthand for creepy. And here's something even weirder. Her presence is starting to show up outside of horror fandoms. You might see a casual reference in a fashion blog, a meme in a cooking forum, Someone jokes, "Made this stew and now my kitchen feels cursed." Annabelle would be proud. It's the kind of joke that feels safe until it's midnight and you're alone and the microwave beeps for no reason. That's how she works. Not by jump scares or gore, but by slowly embedding herself into your routines. Like that weird office chair that keeps turning slightly when your back is turned. You laugh it off, but start avoiding eye contact. By this point, you realize Annabelle doesn't need to be real to be effective. She just needs to be present. And, perhaps most alarmingly, she's made herself useful. There's an entire subculture of spiritual TikTokers who claim Annabelle is their energy touch point. They don't fear her, they channel her. One influencer says she helps her connect with repressed emotions. Another uses her image in meditative rituals for shadow work. Sure, it sounds a bit out there, but then again, people have been using statues, icons, and sacred objects for thousands of years. Annabelle just happens to have a name tag and Hollywood agent. Of course, the skeptics clap back hard. Rationalists on Reddit run analysis threads breaking down the doll's construction, camera tricks, and psychological tricks used in the films. One user even 3D prints their own replica of Annabelle and films it sitting perfectly still for 48 hours straight to prove she doesn't move, which, ironically, just gives her more screen time. And then there's you, still here, still listening, still thinking about a Raggedy Ann doll in a wooden box, somewhere in New England, surrounded by prayers and plexiglass. Maybe you're wondering, is this story still going because it's true? Or is it still going because we keep feeding it? Because every meme, every blog post, every story like this one, you nestled in bed, eyes half closed, hearing about the girl who bought a doll at a used toy shop and brought home something she couldn't explain, adds another layer to the myth. The doll hasn't moved, but the story certainly has. And when you think about it, there's a kind of power in that. Not the spooky kind, not even the spiritual kind, just the quiet power of narrative inertia. Once a story like Annabelle's starts rolling, it doesn't stop. It picks up details, spins new angles, invites people in, like one of those whisper games you played as a kid. You start with a sentence. By the end, it's barely recognizable, but it still makes you shiver. Because somewhere in there, maybe, something true remains. Now go ahead and let your breath slow. You've earned it. We're not at the end yet, but your mind's drifting like a paper boat on still water. You're floating through the culture of fear, of fandom, of folklore with Wi-Fi. And Annabelle, she's floating too. You're heavier now, sinking into the mattress like it's made of warm sand. Your limbs are soft. Your thoughts move slower, but still the story whispers forward. Because Annabelle, that stitched little enigma, isn't done with you yet. Tonight, she isn't in a dusty museum case. She's in you, or at least in the part of you that keeps checking dark corners just a little too long. Let's zoom out. In 2021, with theaters half empty and attention spans crumbling, Warner Brothers launches the Conjuring Universe Experience, an interactive digital tour featuring, yes, a virtual room just for Annabelle. Fans can explore her display, click through photos, read faux documents, And of course, hear chilling narration. It's gimmicky, but it works, because even when no one can visit her in person, they still want in. They want to see her, even just pixels of her. And they want to believe that somehow, through their screen, the experience is still dangerous. That's your mainstream historical fact. Virtual horror is now a legitimate industry. Haunted escape rooms in VR, augmented reality ghost hunts, entire games like Phasmophobia using multiplayer ghost stories to tap into our primal fear. And yet, the old doll still reigns supreme. Why? Because she's simple, a little too simple. You see, with every new appearance, digital, cinematic, or whispered down a hallway, Annabelle reinforces a singular truth. Ambiguity is the key to longevity. She doesn't need to slash, scream, or crawl. She doesn't even need to move. She just exists. Now here's your quirky tidbit. A fan once got a tattoo of Annabelle on his forearm. A week later, he was reportedly hospitalized for a broken wrist after tripping over nothing in his living room. Did the tattoo curse him, or was it karma for terrible taste? Either way, he posted the X-ray on Instagram with the caption, "Annabelle got me." The post got over 40,000 likes. And here's where things start blending. Annabelle is no longer just a character, or a haunted object, or even a meme. She's become a kind of internet tulpa, a thought form made real by belief. The more people fear her, joke about her, invoke her, the more she thrives. Historians still argue whether modern mythologies like this have any place in scholarly study. Is Annabelle folklore? Is she digital superstition? Or is she something brand new, born from film reels and hashtags, not oral tradition? Either way, she's studied, repeated, reinterpreted. You can even find her in university courses now. In 2022, a folklore class at a major U.S. college included a unit titled The Manufactured Mythos, The Rise of Annabelle and Contemporary Demonology. Students were asked to compare her to Baba Yaga, to El Cucuy, even to the Virgin Mary in terms of iconography. Because when you strip away the movie makeup and the jump scares, Annabelle taps into something older than film. The need for explanation, for caution, for control. Think about it. What's scarier than chaos, than randomness, than the idea that anything, even a Raggedy Ann doll, can become cursed without warning? So we make rules. Don't tap on the glass. Don't mock the doll. Don't say her name 3 times near a mirror. Okay, maybe that's Bloody Mary, but you get the idea. These rules give us a kind of comfort, a way to believe that if we follow them, we're safe. We won't be the one who mocked her, the one who brought her home, the one who didn't say thank you after the museum tour. And that's how Annabelle survives. She doesn't need updates. She doesn't need to evolve. She just needs you to wonder, to hesitate, to leave a night light on. By now, the line between story and sleep is blurring. Your breathing matches the rhythm of the fan. Your eyes, if they're still open, are glazed like antique glass. And that's where Annabelle waits, in that blur, in that maybe. You picture her, not the Hollywood porcelain version, but the real one. Yarn hair, soft limbs, a red smile stitched into permanent kindness. Isn't it odd how something so innocent looking can unnerve you? That's the genius of it. Evil rarely looks evil. It doesn't wear horns. It doesn't stomp around. It doesn't even speak. It sits. It smiles. It waits. And we fill in the rest. Annabelle has become a mirror for our anxieties, our need to believe in something beyond explanation, whether that's divine, demonic, or just deeply unknown. Because when things go wrong, when the lights flicker, when your phone glitches, when your keys aren't where you left them, it's easier, somehow, to blame her. Not yourself, not chance. Her. So she persists, across timelines, across screens, across the haze of your almost dream. And you're drifting now, not away from the story, but into it, softly, slowly, like the silence between footsteps on an empty hallway floor. You barely notice the shift as you slide deeper into the folds of the story. The room around you hums gently. Fan, fridge, the distant rustle of a night breeze through your window. And somewhere, beneath it all, that quiet, curious part of your brain keeps tugging at a thread. Because this thing, this Annabelle, wasn't supposed to last. She was a case study, a museum piece, a blip in a paranormal family's long career. And yet, here she is. Again. Still. Always. We move forward, not away. By now, you've likely accepted the odd reality. Annabelle's story was never about just her. It was about what she touched, who she changed, and how easily that change spreads. Take the museum. For instance, after Lorraine Warren's death in 2019, the occult museum she helped build with her husband Ed was shuttered due to zoning issues. But you know how these things go. When a place of legend closes its doors, the stories don't die. They leak. Locals in Monroe, Connecticut, start whispering about strange sightings around the now private residence. One neighbor claims she saw a flickering light in the room where the doll was allegedly kept. Another insists she heard knocking at 3 a.m. every night for a week straight. Real? Hallucination? Neighborhood drama stirred by late-night podcasts? Historians still argue whether we romanticize haunted locations in order to create community myths. It's easier to rally around a shared story. Our street has a cursed house, than to sit quietly with nothing but the truth. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. The Warrens' Occult Museum is among the most Googled haunted locations still closed to the public. Demand to enter has never been higher, and yet no one's going in. So naturally, the space moves online. Fans and researchers begin digitally mapping the layout using archival photos, constructing detailed 3D mock-ups in VR. There's a virtual walkthrough now where you can stand in front of the Annabelle case, hearing static-laced audio clips of old interviews. It's fake, of course, but you feel it. That tension, that irrational itch along the spine. Then there are the replicas. Oh, yes. Annabelle clones for sale on Etsy. Some lovingly hand-stitched, others deliberately worn and stained. They're labeled prop only, but buyers sometimes leave chilling reviews. Felt heavy energy in the room after unboxing. My dog won't go near it. And here come your fringe tidbit. One seller claims their Annabelle replica was returned by mail with no explanation 3 times in 2 months. The package came back unopened, address correct. The seller gave up and burned it. Just didn't want it in my garage anymore, they said. But here's the strange part. These copies, they keep the story alive. Every replica shipped becomes a new node in the mythos. Some bedroom, some shelf, some basement, now holding a small thread of the legend. It's like a virus made of fabric and storytelling. You yawn, but it's not boredom, it's surrender. Surrender to the calm, crawling idea that you're participating in something old and sneaky, a tradition, really, the kind that never needed evidence, just belief. Even the skeptics play their role. There's an entire YouTube genre now, debunking Annabelle. Each video promises logic, but they always include a photo of her, a few zoomed-in clips, that low droning music in the background. And guess what? The comments are always the same. I was fine until she blinked. Bro, you're brave for mocking her. Did anyone else hear the whisper at 8:47? Whether they believe or not, they're feeding her. She survives on curiosity, on mockery, on late-night rabbit holes like the one you're in right now. And this is where it gets deeper, more abstract. Some folklorists now suggest Annabelle represents more than a haunted doll. They argue she's become a cultural placeholder, a vessel not for spirits, but for anxieties. Think of the time she emerged, the 1970s. America was grappling with the aftershock of war, the loss of trust in institutions, a shift in gender roles, a spiritual vacuum in suburban homes. And what appears? A story about something innocent turning threatening, about danger in the home, about not trusting what looks soft and simple. Then think about her resurgence in the 2010s, political upheaval, economic dread, and a surge in nostalgia culture. Suddenly, this old-fashioned toy, so different from sleek tech, feels spooky again. We fear what we don't understand, and we long for what feels familiar. Annabelle is both. So here you are, listening in the dark, not to be scared, but to feel connected, safe even. Because despite everything, rumors, movies, curses, she's still just a doll, right? Right? And yet, as you lie there, the world keeps twisting gently forward. New photos circulate. Someone claims they saw her at a pop-up art gallery in L. Another says she's on a yacht in Dubai. A deep fake video places her at a fashion show in Milan. All false, all silly, but strangely believable. That's the trap. The more outlandish the sighting, the more your mind says, okay, but what if just one is real? Annabelle doesn't need to move. The story does it for her. And that's why she never fades. Because even when you blink, when your dreams begin to scatter into colorless shapes and half-formed faces somewhere in your brain, you still wonder, where is she now? And more importantly, is she alone? You feel the weight of your eyelids grow heavier, the edges of your vision soften, and the faint hum of your surroundings blends into a gentle, almost hypnotic rhythm. Yet your mind clings to the story, as if Annabelle herself is whispering from just beyond the veil of sleep. Because the story of Annabelle isn't just about a doll or even a haunting. It's about connection, the invisible threads that tie people together across time and space through shared fear and fascination. Let's step back for a moment. You know about the Warrens, the famous couple who collected and investigated paranormal phenomena. Ed and Lorraine Warren were the OG ghost hunters of their day, complete with their own museum of curiosities. But did you know Lorraine claimed that Annabelle was just one of many haunted objects they dealt with, a sort of gateway doll among hundreds of artifacts? That's your mainstream historical fact. The Warrens' collection once reportedly numbered over 5,000 items, each with its own dark story. Yet, Annabelle always stands out. Why? Because she's accessible. She's domestic, a rag doll that could be in any child's bedroom, not some ancient cursed relic locked in a remote crypt. She's something you can imagine having once held in your hands. Now for your quirky tidbit. At one point, the Warrens reportedly placed Annabelle in a glass case with a crucifix and a warning sign that reads, "Warning, positively do not open." But a curious skeptic visiting the museum snuck a photo from inside the case and swore the doll's eyes appeared to move in the picture. There's no hard proof, just a slightly blurry Instagram post and a dozen comments debating if it was a camera glitch or something more. Historians still argue whether the Warrens' accounts were exaggerated for public attention or genuinely reflected true paranormal experiences. Their stories blur the line between documentation and performance, between research and legend. But what about the doll itself? There's a fascinating cultural angle here. Rag dolls like Annabelle have been used in folk magic for centuries. In many traditions, such dolls were created as protectors, or sometimes as vessels to trap spirits or curses. They are simple, unassuming, often handmade, and they carry intent. This raises a question scholars still debate. Did Annabelle become haunted because of external forces? Or was she imbued with something by human belief and ritual? You, lying there, realize you are part of that continuum. Every time you hear or tell the story, you add a layer, like a whispered spell. You might chuckle softly at how much we humanize dolls and objects. Yet, history is full of examples where everyday items took on greater meaning, whether the medieval plague masks or the Victorian mourning jewelry. That leads to a subtle but eerie idea. Annabelle isn't just a haunted doll. She's a symbol of our need to externalize fear, to make the invisible visible. And perhaps that's why her story never ends, because as long as people have fears, they'll create stories, and objects like Annabelle become anchors for those tales. You let out a quiet breath, the kind that comes when you almost, just almost, relax into sleep. But then there's a small, stubborn thought. Could belief itself create a kind of haunting? After all, if enough people think something is cursed or haunted, does that make it so? That's the core of Annabelle's mystery. You close your eyes, sensing the room around you, the soft tick of the clock, the faint rustling of leaves outside, the distant buzz of life continuing beyond your window. Somewhere, in this moment, Annabelle waits. Not in a glass case, not on a screen, but here, in the space between your waking and dreaming. She's waiting for the story to be told again. You drift further, a gentle tug guiding your thoughts, as if a soft hand were leading you through shadowed hallways of memory and myth. Annabelle's story isn't just a linear tale. It's a web of stories, layered and retold, stretching across decades and digital platforms alike. Let's pull on one of those threads. You remember the 2014 film Annabelle, a prequel to The Conjuring, that exploded the doll's legend into the mainstream? It's a classic Hollywood cocktail: suspense, jump scares, and a doll that's just uncanny enough to unsettle anyone who's ever felt a little uneasy around toys. The movie was so successful it spawned sequels, a cinematic universe, and merchandise, cementing Annabelle as a horror icon. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Annabelle movie made over $250 million worldwide on a modest budget of around $6.5 million. A staggering return on investment that speaks volumes about how audiences crave this particular kind of fear. Yet the film's portrayal barely resembles the actual doll. The movie's Annabelle has an exaggerated porcelain white face and piercing eyes, designed to maximize the creep factor. The real Annabelle is far less polished, a raggedy cloth doll with yarn hair and button eyes, almost quaint, almost comforting, if you ignore the stories attached. This contrast fascinates people, blurring reality and fiction. Now for your quirky tidbit. A local antique store in Rhode Island once claimed they had an Annabelle-style doll that caused so many customers to feel uneasy that the owner kept it locked in a glass cabinet with a sign reading, "Do not touch." Customers reported hearing faint whispering and footsteps. Of course, skeptics call it clever marketing, but the stories persist. Historians still argue whether horror franchises like Annabelle help preserve folklore or simply commercialize and distort it for profit. The truth lies somewhere in between. The movies amplify the mythology, adding details, rules, and a dramatic narrative arc that makes Annabelle more accessible and memorable. But they also feed the myth's longevity, because every time the story gets a reboot, a sequel, or a new spin-off, it reaches new ears and eyes. Annabelle becomes more than a doll. She becomes a cultural artifact, a collective myth, a modern legend that morphs to fit the fears of the day. You feel the story wrap around you like a slow, familiar lullaby. It's no longer about jump scares or quick shocks. It's about the slow burn of unease, the kind that lingers under your skin and seeps into your dreams. Which is why, when you hear the wind rattle your window or the house creak, you can't help but glance over your shoulder just to check. You wonder, what's real? And what have we conjured with our stories and fears? And you realize that's exactly the point. The story of Annabelle never ends because we don't want it to. We want the chill, the thrill, the subtle shiver down our spines that says, something's watching. And as your breathing slows and your mind drifts towards sleep, that feeling remains, a soft, quiet presence just beyond the edge of dreams. Your eyes flutter, the room's shadows stretching and yawning as you sink deeper into the story's slow embrace. The air seems cooler now, or maybe it's just your imagination, the way your skin prickles in anticipation. Annabelle's tale, you realize, is much more than just a sequence of reported hauntings or a series of movies. It's a reflection of something ancient, our enduring human fascination with objects that hold secrets that might be more than they seem. Did you know that dolls, in general, have a peculiar place in folklore and superstition worldwide? From Japanese kokeshi to European voodoo dolls, these inanimate figures often carry stories of protection, curses, or spiritual possession. That's your mainstream historical fact. Dolls have been used ritually for thousands of years, symbolizing everything from fertility to retribution. Annabelle fits perfectly into this broader tapestry. She's the modern-day iteration of an age-old concept that objects, especially ones resembling humans, can act as vessels for forces beyond our understanding. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some parts of Italy, people leave small dolls or figurines on windowsills to ward off the malocchio, the evil eye. It's a subtle reminder that dolls are more than playthings. They're tokens of belief, protection, or sometimes warnings. Historians still argue whether this kind of object-based superstition arises more from psychological need or genuine metaphysical phenomena. It's a debate as old as anthropology itself. Annabelle's story continues partly because she sits at the intersection of these ancient fears and modern anxieties. She's a reminder that sometimes the most mundane items can become symbols of deeper, unseen threats. As you listen, you might catch yourself imagining that soft fabric face, the yarn hair tangled and faded. It's almost comforting, if not for the stories whispered about her. But this is where the story twists again. Some researchers suggest Annabelle isn't simply haunted, but a symbol of unresolved trauma. The Warrens' reports often speak of victims dealing with loss, fear, or guilt, and the doll becomes a physical manifestation of these emotional wounds. It's like the doll carries the weight of human suffering itself, a silent witness locked in a glass case. You hear the slow ticking of the clock, each second folding over the last, weaving the present with the past. And you wonder if that's why the tale endures, not because the doll is cursed, but because we are. Annabelle reminds us of our vulnerability, our tendency to fear what we can't see but feel deeply. And in that, she becomes a mirror, reflecting the darker corners of our own minds. The soft fan hums again, lulling you closer to sleep, but the story still hums quietly beneath your skin. And just before you let go completely, you think maybe that's the real reason why the story never ends. Because the fear itself is alive. You're drifting further now, the narrative wrapping around you like a cozy blanket that's just a little too scratchy, making you squirm and yet feel oddly safe. There's a strange comfort in hearing the same old story retold, because it means someone else out there understands the shadows you feel when the lights go out. So, let's explore the cultural ripple effect of Annabelle's legend. You've seen how a single doll transformed into a phenomenon. But how does that happen? How does one story weave itself into so many lives? Here's a historical fact to anchor you. Folklore and urban legends often spread through word of mouth, a tradition as old as storytelling itself. Before the internet, tales traveled by campfire whispers, village gossip, and late-night conversations. Annabelle's story, in its earliest days, likely moved this way, from person to person, growing with each telling. But here's a quirky tidbit. Annabelle's legend exploded in the digital age, making her one of the first truly viral haunted objects, from forums to YouTube videos, TikTok clips to fan fiction. Her story multiplies in a way the Warrens probably never imagined. Historians and folklorists still argue whether this digital proliferation dilutes or enriches the original myth. Does viral sharing water down the fear, or does it make the legend more potent by embedding it deeply into collective consciousness? As you listen, picture how modern technology has transformed ghost stories. Instead of local lore confined to one town, Annabelle's tale jumps oceans and languages, spawning memes, art, and even merchandise. This process shows something fascinating about how humans deal with fear. We don't just hide from it. We share it, amplify it, and sometimes laugh at it. Humor is a natural defense mechanism, like how you might snicker when watching a scary movie, even as your heart races. Annabelle's story is no different. The internet has made her a kind of cultural touchstone, an icon representing the unknown in a world increasingly explained by science and reason. Yet, paradoxically, the more we share, the more we keep the mystery alive, because stories like Annabelle's aren't just about facts, they're about emotion, about that quiet moment when you feel a chill and wonder if you're really alone. You, in this moment, become part of that endless chain of storytellers and listeners. Every retelling renews the myth. You might find yourself checking under your bed or glancing at that old doll on your shelf with a new, hesitant respect. And as your breathing slows and the room darkens further, the story settles softly into your bones. Not a tale with an end, but a story always unfolding, like a whispered secret passed down just for you. You feel yourself sinking deeper into the quiet darkness, as if the room itself is breathing softly around you. The story isn't just swirling in your mind anymore, it's becoming part of the very atmosphere, a whispered presence at the edge of your senses. Annabelle's tale has this strange quality. It's both intimate and universal. On the one hand, it's about a single doll, a specific object tethered to one museum and a handful of people. On the other, it taps into a shared human experience, our fascination with the unknown and our tendency to project stories onto the things around us. Here's a historical fact that might surprise you. The concept of haunted dolls dates back centuries. In Victorian England, dolls were often thought to house spirits or be used as conduits for messages from the dead. Some were even buried with their owners, believed to accompany them into the afterlife. A quirky tidbit. In Japan, there's the Okiku doll, which supposedly grows its hair every year. People visit her shrine, hoping to witness this supernatural phenomenon. Now that's dedication to a doll. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were purely superstitious or rooted in early psychological understandings of grief and memory. After all, dolls often serve as emotional surrogates, especially for children dealing with loss. Annabelle's story fits neatly into this tradition. The Warrens claim the doll was possessed by a spirit, but skeptics suggest the reports might have been influenced by human emotion, fear, guilt, or grief that found a focal point in the doll. As you listen, consider how objects like Annabelle become repositories for feelings that are difficult to express. People might imbue them with meaning, whether intentionally or unconsciously, creating stories that help make sense of the unknown. This idea opens another door. The line between reality and belief isn't always clear. Sometimes, what's most powerful isn't whether the doll really moves or talks, but that people believe she does. And that belief fuels the story's endless life. You can almost feel the doll's presence now, not as a threat, but as a symbol of human longing and fear, an artifact of emotion and memory. The quiet tick of the clock marks the passage of time, reminding you that stories like this are as old as humanity itself. Your breathing is slow and steady, your mind drifting deeper into the gentle folds of sleep. But Annabelle's story lingers like a soft shadow, a thread weaving you into a vast tapestry of shared myth. You're no longer just a listener, you're part of the story, and the story is part of you. The air around you cools imperceptibly, carrying with it the scent of aged wood and faint whispers of forgotten tales. You realize that the story of Annabelle isn't confined to her physical form or the eerie museum display. Instead, it thrives in the stories told by those who've encountered or claim to have encountered her. You might find it surprising to learn this historical fact. Throughout history, haunted objects have often been kept in places dedicated to preserving supernatural artifacts. The Warrens' Occult Museum, where Annabelle now resides, is one such place, a collection of cursed relics meant to contain and study the paranormal. But here's a quirky tidbit. The museum is actually in a residential house in Monroe, Connecticut. It's not a grand Gothic castle or shadowy mansion, but a modest, everyday home. Visitors report feeling a heavy atmosphere just by standing outside, as if the building itself breathes with the stories trapped within. Historians still argue whether such museums serve more as genuine repositories of paranormal activity or as theatrical stages that amplify the mystique for visitors and media alike. It's a fascinating question. How much does the environment shape the legend? As you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine the doll resting behind a locked glass case, illuminated by a single dim light. Her threadbare dress, the smudges on her fabric face, the fraying yarn of her hair. It's easy to forget she's just a doll, but the stories imbue her with a weight far heavier than her soft stuffing. You feel a faint echo of footsteps, the soft scrape of glass, a whispered name, Annabelle. And as the night deepens, you sense how the story has traveled far beyond the Warrens, carried on the wings of countless retellings, from blog posts to podcasts, from whispered conversations to full-length documentaries. Each telling adds layers, new details, new interpretations, new scares. The myth adapts like a living thing, responding to the fears and curiosities of every generation. What's more, the doll has become a cultural icon of the supernatural, appearing in video games, graphic novels, and even Halloween costumes. This cross-medium presence keeps her legend alive, breathing new life into an old story every October. Your mind begins to swirl with these layers, the tangible and intangible blending seamlessly. The doll's story is no longer just about fear. It's about how stories evolve, how they connect us, how they keep us awake just long enough to wonder, and in that wonder, The story goes on. You feel your breath slow, the room quieting as the story seeps deeper into your thoughts. Annabelle's tale is no longer just an isolated event. It's a reflection of our modern world's complex relationship with fear and storytelling. Here's a historical fact. The Warrens, who first popularized Annabelle's story, were among the first paranormal investigators to bring occult research into public consciousness in the mid-20th century. Their work helped shape the modern ghost hunting culture, blending religious ritual with investigative curiosity. A quirky detail: Ed Warren was known for carrying a tiny prayer book everywhere, often reciting prayers aloud to protect himself during investigations. Imagine a paranormal detective armed not with gadgets, but with faith and resolve. Historians still debate the authenticity of the Warrens' cases, with skeptics pointing to a mix of showmanship, confirmation bias, and psychological suggestion. But regardless of the truth, their stories have had a lasting impact on pop culture and the way we frame supernatural experiences. Annabelle's story sits squarely at this crossroads, part faith, part folklore, part fear, and all drama. The Warrens' narrative framed the doll as a vessel of malevolent energy, yet to believers, she also represents a cautionary tale about meddling with forces beyond human control. Imagine the doll's glass case as a symbolic boundary between the known and the unknown, the natural and the supernatural, safety and danger. This boundary fascinates us because it's blurry. It invites us to question reality, to explore the edges where science meets mystery. And it's precisely that tension, the unresolved, the ambiguous, that keeps the story alive. Because when there's no clear answer, the mind fills in the gaps with imagination and fear. You might find yourself wondering if Annabelle is contained safely behind glass. What about the stories she inspires? Can those be contained, or do they slip out, spreading like whispers in the dark? The story's endurance may lie not in the doll's physical presence, but in its symbolic power, the way it embodies our collective anxiety and curiosity. As you begin to drift, the boundaries between reality and myth blur softly, like the edges of a dream. Annabelle watches, silent but always present, and you realize, just before sleep claims you, that some stories don't end because they never meant to. They're meant to keep us wondering. The quiet hum of night settles around you now, like a lullaby woven from dust and candle smoke. The shadows stretch long across your memory, where stories nestle gently, especially the ones that refuse to end. Annabelle, silent and stuffed, has followed you here too, her stitched smile unchanged. Tonight, let's drift deeper into her afterlife in pop culture, because even after the real doll was locked away in her glass case, her cinematic self burst forth with far more flair and significantly more eyeliner. Here's a historical fact for your sleepy brain to nibble on. In 2013, The Conjuring was released to massive acclaim, sparking an entire Conjuring universe of films, many of which orbit around Annabelle's fictionalized version, despite only briefly appearing in the original film. Her presence captured imaginations enough to warrant not one, not two, but 3 spin-offs. The quirky tidbit: the doll in the films doesn't look anything like the real Annabelle, Hollywood ditched the raggedy red yarn sweetness of the actual Raggedy Ann and gave us something far spookier: porcelain skin, glass eyes, and a face like she just lost a staring contest with Satan. It's theatrical, sure, but psychologically smart. We're far more unsettled by things that look almost human, but not quite. A little phenomenon called the uncanny valley. Historians and film scholars still argue whether these modern horror films reflect genuine cultural fears or are just cleverly packaged nostalgia and jump scares. But what's not debated is the effectiveness. Annabelle's cinematic form has burned herself into our collective dreamscape, leaping far beyond the quiet Connecticut home where she was first locked away. You picture the movie theater now, that half-empty popcorn bag on your lap, the flickering screen painting your face in shadows. You tell yourself it's fiction, but there's that twitch in the back of your neck, the one that says, "Don't look behind you." The truth is, film has a unique power. It turns the abstract into the visual. The whispered stories become bone-chilling dialogue, slow creaks on hardwood floors, flickering bulbs, and sudden slams. The Annabelle in the movies may be fake, but the fear she evokes is real. And she's not just on screen anymore. You'll find her on mugs, t-shirts, Funko Pop figures, yes, seriously, and even Halloween lawn decor. The fictional Annabelle has become a brand, like Coca-Cola, if Coke occasionally cursed your house. But even in this glossy afterlife, the myth loops back around. Fans often trace the movies back to the real story, diving down rabbit holes of YouTube deep dives and Reddit threads titled things like, "Is Annabelle actually real?" with photos, usually with ominous piano music in the background. You smile softly, sleep brushing the edges of your mind, as you realize that fiction and reality now hold hands. The story feeds the movie, and the movie feeds the legend. It's a perfect cycle. Every scare sells another ticket. Every ticket revives the myth. And every myth reminds us why we're still a little hesitant to walk past a doll's blank stare at night. So tonight, Annabelle doesn't haunt your dreams as a threat. She just takes her place, right beside you, in the quiet theater of your imagination, always waiting for the next curtain to rise. You're drifting now, weightless in that soft, liminal space between waking and dreaming, where time folds like an old map, and through that fog of sleep, Annabelle's presence remains, not as a jump scare, but as something quieter, more persistent. Not loud footsteps in the attic, but the floorboard that always creaks when you walk by. She is continuity disguised as cloth. By now, you understand, Annabelle doesn't stay still, even locked in her case. She's constantly moving through conversation, culture, and curiosity, and perhaps the most powerful space she moves through is digital. Here's a historical fact. The first recorded internet creepypasta, those eerie viral horror stories, can be traced back to forums from the early 2000s, where users shared tales like Slenderman or the Russian sleep experiment. These urban legends thrived on low-res photos, grainy videos, and just enough based on a true story language to ignite imaginations. Annabelle, of course, didn't miss the digital train. She became a staple of Reddit's paranormal, YouTube deep dives, ghost hunting TikToks, and hundreds of AI-generated true horror videos. Quirky tidbit. On several occasions, social media users have reported their phones acting strangely after watching Annabelle content. Screens flickering, apps crashing, or voice assistants randomly activating. Sure, it's likely technical glitches, but it's also exactly the kind of thing that keeps people watching. Historians still argue whether modern folklore can evolve authentically in a digital space, or whether internet stories are too self-aware, too performative, to be real. But that assumes folklore needs to be true. It doesn't. It just needs to be believable enough. Annabelle thrives in this new mythology economy. The more we share her, the more real she becomes, not because of any demon, but because of data. Every click, every like, every repost stitches another inch onto the tapestry of her legend. Imagine now a teenager at 3 a.m., bathed in the cold blue glow of their screen, watching a video titled "Real Footage of Annabelle Moving." Their room is silent, except for the sound of their own breathing. The doll twitches, maybe. Or maybe it's just the grainy VHS flicker. But that heartbeat moment, that pause, that rush of adrenaline is the spark. And it only takes a spark to keep a story alive. So Annabelle, once just a doll, has become a participatory myth. She doesn't just scare us. She invites us to join the ritual, click, comment, share, speculate. In a world dominated by algorithms, she's learned how to haunt them. And now, as your breathing deepens, you realize you too are part of this chain. You've listened, imagined, wondered. You've walked her path in your own mind. The doll may be still, but her story scrolls endlessly. The rhythm of your breath syncs now with the quiet hum of the story, soft and steady, like a clock that's been ticking for far longer than you realized. Annabelle doesn't knock or scream. Her power is subtler than that. She waits, she lingers, she lets others carry her name. And strangely enough, some of those others include real people, witnesses, believers, and even skeptics who somehow end up in the narrative whether they want to or not. Here's a historical fact. The Warrens didn't just stash Annabelle in the museum and call it a day. For years, they gave lectures at universities and paranormal conventions, always highlighting the doll as one of their most dangerous cases. Ed Warren famously claimed that a priest once mocked the doll during a tour, only to crash his car hours later. And here's the quirky tidbit. The motorcycle accident victim mentioned in earlier versions of Annabelle's story reportedly laughed at her in the museum, tapped the glass, and dared her to do something. According to the tale, he never made it home. His girlfriend survived and later said they'd been joking about Annabelle moments before the crash. Was it coincidence? Was it just a tragic story wrapped in another one? Historians still argue whether these stories were exaggerated, invented, or simply misunderstood. Eyewitness memory is famously unreliable, and fear, especially fear triggered in dimly lit, sacred-feeling spaces, can make even the most rational mind falter. But here's what matters. These stories aren't just told, they're experienced. People leave the museum feeling cold, unsettled, like something unseen watched them. They take the story with them, back to their homes, where suddenly a light flickers or a doll falls off a shelf. Nothing serious, just enough to make the hair on your arms stand up. You can imagine it now, being there in person, standing before the glass. Your breath fogs the case slightly. The doll doesn't move. Of course, but your mind plays tricks. You imagine her head tilting just slightly when you look away, and the signs are there, literally. There's a warning on the case. Do not touch, not for dramatic effect, for protection. The museum is more than a place. It's a pilgrimage site for the curious, the superstitious, and the sleepy thrill seekers. And everyone who visits becomes part of the tale. The moment they tell a friend what it felt like to stand there, the myth lives on. Annabelle isn't just famous because she's scary. She's famous because she's interactive. A story you step into, like a haunted theater where you're not quite sure if the actors are acting. And you're in the front row now, watching, listening, wondering. Let the story wrap around you like a threadbare quilt, soft, strange, and stitched with names you'll never know. You are one more voice in the long line of those who've whispered about her in the dark. Annabelle doesn't need to knock on your door. You opened it hours ago. Sleep pulls at the edges of your thoughts now, like a tide slowly rolling in, gentle and steady. But before you drift fully away, there's one more chapter to explore. The odd, persistent belief that Annabelle isn't just a story or a haunted doll, but something far older, something archetypal, something that taps into the way humans have always feared certain objects. Here's a historical fact. Across cultures and centuries, humans have believed that objects can hold energy, both sacred and sinister. In ancient Egypt, small figurines were buried with the dead to perform tasks in the afterlife. In parts of medieval Europe, it was common to bind spirits to amulets or dolls as protection or punishment. Now for your quirky tidbit. In 1895, a British family claimed a handmade doll named Letitia began crying real tears after the youngest daughter died. They sealed the doll in a cupboard for 73 years. When it was finally opened in the 1960s, the room was reportedly filled with the scent of salt and roses. Unexplainable, probably, unforgettable, absolutely. Historians still argue whether these kinds of stories come from spiritual beliefs, psychological projection, or just really good storytelling. But either way, dolls have always walked that line between the innocent and the uncanny. You think about it now. What is it about dolls? They mimic human form, but they don't age. They don't blink. They wait. And in waiting, they begin to take on the emotions projected onto them. A grieving mother whispers to her child's doll. A lonely child talks to it like a friend. A curious ghost hunter sets up an EVP session and swears he hears breathing. It's not about the cotton or porcelain or plastic. It's about what we give it. Attention, fear, belief. Annabelle, then, isn't just a haunted doll. She's a placeholder for centuries of belief in object possession, in ancient cursed relics, in voodoo dolls and effigies and family heirlooms that no one dares move from the shelf. You picture a museum in 100 years. Annabelle's still there. Maybe in a more high-tech case. Maybe with digital plaques. Maybe with a warning hologram. But still watching. And somewhere a tired historian leans back in their chair, sighs, and wonders aloud why this doll, of all things, lasted. Because she was never just a doll. She was a mirror. And all of us, especially when we're tired, see something different in the reflection. Your mind is a soft sea now, waves of half-thoughts and fading images lapping gently at the edge of wakefulness. But somewhere out there, the legend still moves, not loudly, not even clearly, just enough to keep the lights on in the attic of your imagination. Let's follow the story a little further, into Hollywood, where Annabelle slipped into something more cinematic. Here's a historical fact. The first Conjuring film, released in 2013, was based on one of Ed and Lorraine Warren's real-life cases. But it wasn't about Annabelle. She was just the chilling opening act. Still, audiences were so intrigued by the eerie Raggedy Ann style doll that filmmakers spun her off into her own film series. 3 films later, Annabelle, 2014, Annabelle, Creation, 2017, and Annabelle Comes Home, 2019, the doll had firmly cemented her place in modern horror. She was no longer a soft, friendly red-haired toy. Hollywood's Annabelle was porcelain, pale, cracked, with ghostly blue eyes and that perfectly creepy half-smile. The kind of doll you wouldn't even want on your shelf, ironically. Quirky tidbit. Despite the film's fictionalized versions of events, the real Annabelle's appearance was never changed. The actual doll remains in the Warrens' museum, unchanged, unblinking, and, some would say, still active. Historians still argue whether these horror adaptations dilute the seriousness of folklore or breathe new life into it. Are we disrespecting the old tales by dramatizing them? Or are we just doing what humans have always done, embellishing, exaggerating, and sharing stories to suit the age? Either way, Hollywood gave Annabelle legs, not literally, thankfully, but metaphorically, legs that ran all the way through pop culture. Halloween costumes, YouTube skits, fan fiction, memes. She went from museum display to mainstream icon. Like Frankenstein's monster or Dracula, she crossed over from rumor to reality to silver screen legend. But let's zoom out for a moment. In these films, Annabelle is almost never the main threat. She's a conduit, a channel, a silent thing that lets louder terrors enter. And that, well, that feels important, because Annabelle's power, even in fiction, is passive. She doesn't chase you with a knife. She doesn't scream. She doesn't move much, if at all. She just sits. And yet, her presence alone alters everything around her. That's the genius of her fear factor. It's not what she does. It's what you imagine she might do. As you rest now, maybe you picture yourself on a film set, props all around, cameras rolling. You reach for the Annabelle prop, just a replica, right? And yet your fingers hesitate, just for a second, because even when she's pretend, part of you wonders, what if this time it's not? That hesitation, that pause, that's the story doing its job. And in the dim, flickering reel of your dreams, Annabelle waits. She's patient, she's practiced, and she's exactly where she needs to be. There's a stillness to this part of the night, a slow exhale from the walls. Your pillow shifts slightly as your body surrenders to gravity, and the air feels heavy, like dusk in an old library filled with books that haven't been opened in years. But the story, oh, the story still breathes. Annabelle, in her quiet way, survives not through actions, but through attention, through repetition, through your ears, right now, tracing her legend in the dark. Here's a historical fact. The idea that stories can haunt us more than objects do has roots deep in folklore. In ancient Japan, the concept of tsukumogami describes everyday objects that, after 100 years, come to life with spirits of their own. These weren't monsters in the Western sense, but mischief makers, watchers, reminders that everything left alone long enough becomes something else. A quirky tidbit for your mental scrapbook. In 1986, a Welsh antique shop owner claimed her porcelain clown doll regularly shifted position overnight. She said it only happened on full moons, and only if customers made fun of it. She eventually sold it to a local museum, where it now rests in a sealed display, lovingly nicknamed Sir Chuckles. That name alone earns it a seat at the Annabelle table. Historians still argue whether such objects really carry any essence of spirit, or if the human brain, desperately craving patterns and meaning, invents hauntings where none exist. But regardless of the source, the result is the same. We behave differently around certain things. We whisper. We glance twice. We feel watched. Annabelle, then, is a cultural sponge. She absorbs the fears and fascinations of every decade. In the 1970s, she mirrored fears of spiritual unrest. In the 2000s, she fit neatly into our obsession with found footage and haunted evidence. And in the age of TikTok and deepfakes, she's a content queen. Clips of her rocking in her glass case or leaking into security cam footage circulate constantly, usually without source or context, just a vague caption like, "She moved again," and people watch. Millions do, not because they fully believe, but because part of them wants to believe, or at least wants the story to continue. Because maybe that's what haunts us the most, not cursed dolls or creaky museums, but unfinished stories, loose ends, the possibility that something small, something still, could reach through time and whisper, "I'm not done yet." You picture the museum one last time, after hours. The lights are dimmed. The air smells faintly of old paper and floor polish. A janitor passes through, mop in hand. The case glints faintly in the glow of an emergency exit sign. He walks by without looking, smart, and Annabelle doesn't move. But you do. You carry her now, just a little, into your own quiet night. So here we are, the edge of it. The story has slowed to a murmur, like a bedtime song you've almost memorized. You're wrapped in stillness now, your limbs heavy, breath soft. But Annabelle, she's still very much awake. Or maybe not. Maybe that's just the way she wants to be remembered, right on the cusp of movement. Tonight, though, you understand why her story refuses to end. Here's your final historical fact. In 2006, paranormal researcher Massimo Polidoro noted that urban legends evolve faster than traditional folklore because they adapt to new mediums, radio, TV, social media. They're like digital ghosts, shape-shifting through whatever form the culture needs. And Annabelle, she's become a modern myth, that refuses to stay quiet. The quirky tidbit: there's a surprisingly robust online market for haunted dolls. eBay once had to ban listings claiming items were possessed, but the ban didn't stop sellers. It just made them more creative. Now you'll see phrases like strong energy or not recommended for the faint of heart somewhere in that pile of stuffed rabbits and cracked bisque heads. Maybe there's an Annabelle wannabe, or 2, or 20. Historians still argue whether these new legends, these viral, meme-powered ghost tales, should be taken seriously. Are they just amusement? Do they reflect modern anxieties? Or are they ancient fears in digital disguise? But let's forget the scholars for now. Let's return to the quiet hum of your room, the way the shadows stretch long and slow across the ceiling. You know better than anyone that stories don't need to be real to matter. What matters is repetition, attention, memory. And Annabelle is a memory that writes herself again and again, in hushed retellings, in blurry screenshots, in the slight, uncertain pause you feel now, as you lie still and wonder, if I had that doll, what would I do? Would I ignore her? Would I speak kindly to her? Would I believe her silence? Or would I, like so many before, pass her story on? Because that's the truth. Stories like Annabelle don't end. They live as long as someone listens. And you listened well. Now let the words fade. Let your breathing slow, your limbs sink. Let the story tuck itself in, quietly beside you. There you go. No need to think too hard now. Just let the stillness settle in. The room around you is quiet. Maybe the fan hums softly in the corner. Maybe there's the distant hush of traffic or night insects. Or maybe it's just silence, wrapping around you like a familiar old quilt. You're safe here. You've walked through dusty corridors, peeked behind glass cases, listened to creaking floorboards and old ghost tales, and now it's time to let them all go. You don't need to hold on to anything anymore, not the odd details, not the whispered legends, not even the strange calm that comes with finally understanding why the story of Annabelle never quite stops. It's okay to leave the lights low tonight. It's okay to let your thoughts wander into dream. No haunted dolls, no museums, just the soft weight of your blankets and the slow rhythm of sleep pulling gently at your mind. Each breath is a lullaby. Each blink is a promise that you're drifting towards something quieter. And that story, it'll still be there in the morning, waiting, not watching, just resting, like you've done enough. So now, finally, close your eyes. Release the last sliver of tension from your body. Let the weight of the day dissolve. You've heard the story. You've made it to the end. And now it's time to dream.